Hey guys, it's Josh Snow and Brian Anderson. Today we're going to be talking about the Cato API. I'm really stoked for this because the API is extremely powerful at Cato and there's a lot you can do with it. But we're going to really help demystify that. And so today we're going to talk about what the Cato API is and then how you can make your first API call. So Brian, take it away. Let's walk through what the Cato API is and some of the possibilities.
Awesome. Thank you. Let's first frame the conversation about what we're looking to achieve or what the outcomes are, why we would even use the Cato API. So if
Yep.
you're familiar with the Cato platform, obviously there is a global private backbone we want to connect to. We need to perform different types of tasks like creating sites, maybe provisioning rules, and maybe getting data out of the platform, security events, security incidents, and that sort of thing. So typically that starts off with, version control systems, and maybe you have other platforms that are out there and frameworks that would help enable the automation of provisioning configurations like Terraform, Pulumi, or Azure DevOps. And there's a whole suite of tool sets that are out there. And then secondarily, there might be other teams that would use other solutions like Ansible, Chef or Puppet or Salt to provision new rules, for example, or make exceptions or modify your network configurations. And then lastly, there's what do we do with the data that we have? In the Cato platform, we see all ports, all protocols, a very rich data set. How do we make that actionable? We want to invoke things in like an ITSM system, like a ServiceNow, or maybe send data to Splunk for different business units or your network operations team or security operations team that may be interacting with your data and through the platform that way. So all the arrows that we see here in this diagram are APIs or what enable the interactions between these different platforms.
That's awesome. All I see is possibility. And what's great today is we're going to give you the foundational elements to generate your own API call, which will start you on your journey of building any of the things that we just showed today. Some of it's going to be off the shelf that you can build, others it's you can then start to build your own. And that's what we're going to walk you through today.
Awesome. Yeah. So starting at the high level here, we always start with the documentation. This is our Cato Management API documentation, and many folks in the industry are familiar with REST APIs or SOAP APIs historically. This is a GraphQL API. It still works as an HTTP request. You still send a POST request, but in this case, the way the GraphQL works is they have the concept of queries, which is the ability to pull and retrieve information or data, and then there's something called mutations, which are the way that you would create, update, or delete different configurations. So this is the documentation. You can feel free to kind of sift through that if you want some exciting reading on the weekend. But
And we're going to do a separate video on this so that you can be able to consume that on its own if that's something you're interested in.
awesome. But we'll do separate videos also on something called the Playground. And the Playground is kind of an off-the-shelf tool set that's exposed with GraphQL. They'll let you test your own API calls. And so we'll do one separate session on how to use this. You also may be familiar with a client called Postman, a very common API testing tool that may also help automate certain tasks and so forth. So we'll have a separate session on Postman. But today we're going to be covering a tool that's on github.com/Cato Networks called the Cato API Explorer. The Cato API Explorer is an application that runs on top of Docker. So there's an assumption that we already have Docker installed here. We're going to have a separate session on how to install that. But essentially, all you do is download this from docker.com and start it up. And you could then work through standing up the Cato API Explorer locally on your system to be able to use.
Cool. Super easy.
Mhm.
So,
So initially, what we can do is either download all this code directly from GitHub, or really all that you need is this one file, the Docker compose.yaml file. So if I literally just take this one file, I could either download that from here or just copy this text. I put that into a file on my local workstation. So in a folder that I've created, I've got a Docker compose.yml file, and then I've added this text to that file. So that's all that I've done so far, apart from having Docker running on my system. And then what I do in a terminal window is I would make sure that I'm in this folder, the same folder that I'm having this file, this Docker Compose file present in. And this is going to point to basically where we publish our container. So all that we need to do if Docker Compose is running, if Docker is running, we run Docker Compose pull. I could type and talk at the same time. And what this is going to do is it's going to tell Docker to look at the file that you have, and it's going to pull this image down from where we publish it in what's called the container registry. So now I've pulled this data, this container down. The next command that I'm going to run is Docker compose up -d. And what that does is it stands up the container. and then it runs as a background daemon process. So it continues to run on my system here. Now, one important thing to note is this configuration, which is you could leave it as the default, but this is port 8080. And on my workstation that I'm running on, when I go in a browser, this is the port that I'm going to be accessing this application on. So when I go in here to a browser window, if this application is running, I should be able to refresh localhost port 8080, and that is how I get access to my application. And so
Perfect.
essentially, now the Explorer is running locally. The first thing that I want to do in the Explorer is I want to configure an API key. And what does that mean and how does that work? So if I transition back over to the Cato management application, under the resources tab in the Cato management application, under API keys, I can create a brand new key and I can give this whatever name that I want. And I could define whether or not I want this to be a view or an edit key. And then if I want to restrict access for my API key to only come from certain IPs, I can do that, which is a good security practice. And then we can choose how long you want this key to be good for. So it's not a forever key that lives in the system. So once I create this, I hit save. I would get prompted to copy that key down. What I would do then is go add a new key here and put in my information. There's a couple of different options for servers you can use. There's a US one, there's an Ireland, there's an India. Essentially, it works like this. I put in the name for my key, the account ID, which, by the way, in the Cato management application is easiest found probably in the URL here, is your account ID to use. And then if I add those attributes there, whenever I save my credentials, the Cato API Explorer will then test those credentials and make sure that they're valid. And so now I've essentially connected the Cato management application to my tenant.
So now
And
you're ready to make API calls at this point, right?
that's exactly right.
That's awesome.
So in the Explorer, the interesting thing about this is that every time you refresh this page, it pulls down what's called our production schema. And what is that? This is all of the API calls that are supported for the Cato management application. So today we might have, 50, 100, tomorrow might be 500. All of those are now available in an easy drop down that I could say what calls are available to me in the platform. And all that I have to do is simply select one. And what this client does, which is different from either Postman or the GraphQL playground, is it automatically renders all the parameters and all of the arguments that I would need to be able to construct one of my API calls. And down here in the middle, just to share with everyone, this is every possible parameter that is available to be selected for what's called the account snapshot. Now, the account snapshot is a call that gives you a snapshot of the account, all your sites, all your sockets, all your users, that sort of thing. It gives you some information about that. And I can choose here whether or not I want to filter for certain sites. And notice that when I selected
Oh, that's
this,
cool.
it automatically drops in what's called site IDs. So I don't need to go look those up and construct my payload. But what's interesting here is if I hit execute, I now get an interactive live response back from the API. So what I've done in this few minute session here is I've just created a key, and now I'm already making API calls against the Cato management application interactively.
Even just the sites you wanted. So if you only wanted certain sites, that's what all
Mhm.
you would get from this specific call. That's cool.
That's exactly right. So I can uncheck this and it removes those sites from my payload. And now I get interactively back all of the sites from my entire environment. So another interesting thing here is down in this bottom right section, these are code examples. And we have a Cato CLI, which we'll talk about in a moment, which generates code examples for me, incorporating my parameters that I select maybe. We also have Python examples, which I can literally copy and paste this syntax into a Python script that I run on my local system. I run it and it works, provided that I have my authentication, my API key in an environment variable, and so forth, and it walks you through how to do that. And then lastly, we have even a curl example. Now, curl is simply a command line way to run a web request. That's it. And so if I paste this into a terminal window and I put in my key, which I could choose to unmask that if I wanted, I can paste it into a terminal window or to a shell script. It will work. And that's exactly the same call that I just selected from this dropdown here. So it's that easy now. We are interactively making calls against our own kind of CMA tenant.
That's huge. So now you've gone all the way from creating the API key to whatever individual call you want to be able to make. And then you even can add those request variables, which I've always found to be, as a new API user, like, where do I change a variable? I messed up the bracket or this. This just makes that process easy. And so once you have this, Brian, you just copy that into your terminal interface to be able to start making API calls, right?
That's exactly right. So
Okay.
I can take this and copy this into a terminal window, or I could put it into a bash script, or I can use the Python script, which is a very, very common programming language that a lot of people use for integrations and automation work. But the next call I'd like to talk about, we already talked about kind of the account snapshot, to give you kind of data about the account users and sites and so forth. But there's kind of a general purpose call called the entity lookup call. And the way that the Cato API is structured, there's a lot of the read operations you're looking for. For example, if I want to look up my interfaces or my site ranges, I could pick what I want to look up, and then I can run this, and it will give me a list back of whatever thing that I'm selecting from that list. So here's all my site ranges that I have in my account, for example. This is a demo account that we're running here. I can also choose to look up maybe all my VPN users that might be in my environment, right? Or even my sites and so forth. So this gives me a list of all of those kind of
So you can
readily.
then validate the response to see, all right, I'm putting together this bigger, chef script or this provisioning, or these are the events I want to send. So you can start to validate those here of what you're starting to put together in a bigger view by understanding these responses. Say, oh yeah, that looks good. I'm going to add, now I'm going to take that code and add that to my larger playbook. I know it's kind of a rookie way to say it, but is that a
That's
fair
exactly right.
assessment?
Because what you want as a developer is you first want to see what the response looks like, so that when I start to go develop code, I know
Mm-hmm.
what object that I'm looking to get back. I know that it's data, and then there's a child node called entity lookup, data.entitylookup.items. This is a list, it's an array of
Mm-hmm.
items. So I
Yeah.
would know what the data structure is that I'm going to be parsing in my response, and then I would know how to make that useful for whatever kind of task that I'm working on, whether it's importing something or maybe exporting something and then doing something with that. Maybe I
Yeah.
want to pull down all the sites that we have, or lists of applications or whatever it is. This kind of helps you enable to test interactively. What is that call going to look like?
Yeah.
Yeah, so if I were to go into maybe I'm looking up a list of sites, let's talk about how to use this a little bit more interactively. Or maybe I'm looking for network interfaces, for example. And so this is all the network interfaces in my environment, but I actually get a lot of these back, and I don't maybe want all of these at one time. So maybe I want to create a filter for a particular site. I want to filter my network interfaces. So in here, this gives me the ability to kind of edit the entity input. And what I want to do is I want to filter for a site, and I'm going to filter for the value of site ID. And when I hit add here, notice that it adds this to the kind of parent. And now it actually passed this down into my variables here. And it gave me
Yeah.
all of this down into all these different code generation tools, where now if I run that request again, I only get back one interface that is for that site.
Yeah. That's
So what I
super
did is
cool.
I just created that kind of dynamic filter on the fly
Yeah.
from the data that I got back from the API, right?
Awesome. This has been super helpful, Brian. Future videos, we are going to start to stitch this together for other integrations, putting this together inside of deeper scripts so that you can then take this and really shine with the Cato API. But this is such a cool tool. Thanks for introducing it, Brian, because it allows people like me who kind of know APIs, but now I can be really dangerous with that. And I think a lot of people are starting to, it takes that intimidation level away. And so
Mhm.
I really appreciate what you built here, and I'm excited to try to use it and hope everyone else is too.
Yep. One last little thing that we wanted to cover here would be the CLI. And so what I've done so far here is I've generated a request, and it gave me example syntax. I can simply install the Cato CLI in a terminal window by running pip3 install Cato CLI if you have Python installed in your system. And then I would run Cato CLI configure. And then that would walk me through setting up my credentials. And then if I put my credentials in, just like I got from, the Cato management application, I can now take this exact query that I got from the Cato management application and run that in the terminal window and get the exact same
Wow,
output. They're designed to kind of work hand in hand.
that's
And so
huge.
I don't need to write a lot of code. I just need the command to run, and I can use the Explorer that I have here to create any payload that I want to for any API. And then
Yeah,
I literally just copy this out, drop it in a terminal, drop it in a shell script, and you're off and running.
yeah. So then you can just start iterating. Right? That's
Mhm.
that's huge. All right, Brian. Thanks so much. Appreciate your time. Look for the next videos, guys. Thanks so much.
Thanks, everyone.